for that wonderful grounding and the land acknowledgement. I feel much more settled. It's definitely an unsettling time in many ways. So any moment to kind of just get grounded in our vision and our values as a group in this strange new Zoom world is very much appreciated. So thank you for that. And thank you to the fund for having me. So I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint and make sure I can share this. Okay. And it's good to see some familiar faces. Can you all see that? Okay, and you're just seeing the slide and not a bunch of stuff on my desktop, hopefully, right? I was having that problem in a previous training, so good. And as Stanley said, please feel free to use the chat. And just a little bit more about myself, Stanley, thank you for the introduction. You know, I've been doing fundraising for 20 plus years. I was born and raised here in the Bay Area. I've also done a fair amount of work with folks on the Central Coast, both Santa Barbara and Ventura counties. And I have a very good friend who Stanley knows actually, Lucas Zucker, who works at Cause down there, who is, I'm very good friends with that family. So I'm familiar with a little bit some of the landscape and the context you all are operating in. I'm obviously not an expert, but I do have some, I'd have a lot of love for the Central Coast. I think it's a beautiful place, obviously, and I'm really happy to be working with you all today. So today we're going to talk about sprint campaigns, and I'll talk about what that is in a second. But first I'm going to have Stanley actually pull up a poll so I can get a sense of what your all's experience is with sprint campaigns. So Stanley, you pull that up, great. So the poll is just a simple question, not multiple choice, just click one answer. Have you participated in or organized a sprint fundraising campaign before? So either as a fundraiser, perhaps you might have helped fundraise for a group, or you might have actually led a sprint campaign. And if you don't know what a sprint campaign is, that's on there too. And if you're not sure, that's another option. So go ahead and answer the poll, and we'll take just a few seconds here for folks to read that and respond, just so I can have a sense of what folks' level of experience is. I know that most of you have done the Santa Barbara Gives campaign, which I think might be a little bit longer than a sprint campaign, but I'm not sure if all of you have done that, so it's just good for me to know. All right, we can pull up the results. All right, okay, so interesting. So about half of you want to know what a sprint campaign is. That's totally fine. I didn't know what it was until a couple of years ago. We'll talk about that for sure. About a third of you have not done a sprint campaign. Okay, and then a few of you have, and then some of you aren't sure. Okay, that's totally fine. That gives me a sense of what we're working with. So we'll definitely define a sprint campaign right now, actually. So a sprint campaign, it's and actually just the origins of it for those of you who like learning about this kind of stuff. I'm a writer, so I'm always really interested in the etymology of words and where they came from. I believe that it comes kind of from the tech world. I only know that because my husband's a web programmer, and a lot of tech companies use a project management system called Agile, which some of you may be familiar with. And so the way that Agile breaks up chunks of work is they call them sprints. And so they're short chunks, like a week long or 2 week long sort of periods of work where you're supposed to accomplish all these different things, and then you go on to the next sprint. So I think that kind of trickled over into the nonprofit world. And so a sprint campaign is essentially 2 weeks long or shorter, you know, maybe a little bit longer, but it's a very short campaign. And so people sometimes do these without even knowing that they're doing sprint campaigns. But the reason we like them, or people tend to like them, is because it's kind of this short, intensive burst of energy. A lot of people, most people, I would say, don't like fundraising, right? It's something that they sort of put off and kind of, you know, put to the last minute. And so a sprint campaign can provide a lot of structure and just sort of help people focus for a short amount of time, and then they're done. So it can be a very effective way and efficient way to kind of get your team to really focus on fundraising for a little while, and then kind of finish and feel a sense of accomplishment. So we find that it's a way to engage your team members, you know, your volunteer fundraisers, your board, in a way that can be really helpful and useful. And it also, that 2 week period is very short, right? Or even sometimes it's shorter than 2 weeks. I'm gonna share a couple examples of sprint campaigns that were 5 days. So it creates a sense of urgency, right? It's a lot harder to slack on your fundraising responsibilities when you only have 5 days, or you only have 2 weeks to get everything done, right? So it really helps people realize, oh, I have to do this now. I can't wait, you know, a few more days when I'm less busy, or you know, it really forces your team to focus on your campaign. So let me just stop there and see if anybody has any questions about just the definition of a sprint campaign, since a lot of you didn't know what it was. And Stanley, if you could let me know what's going on in the chat. It's a little hard for me to see when I have my slideshow on. Any questions about what a sprint campaign is? That makes sense? Okay, so we'll go on. I'm having a problem here. Okay, so in order to do a sprint campaign, there are some things that you need. You don't need to have all of these necessarily. This is sort of the ideal of things that you need to do a sprint campaign successfully. You need to have some kind of system for keeping track of your donors. Hopefully all of you have something, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet or a real database CRM, but a way to track all the information that you're going to put into the database of donors you're going to ask, and then also all the gifts and the contacts that you're going to make as part of the campaign. You need to have a clear message and talking points, which is essentially your pitch, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. You need to have an ability and willingness to follow up, and that's also for the team that you're going to recruit. So that's sort of, common sense. If you're going to do fundraising, you have to be able to follow up, not just make the ask, but follow up on the ask. And a lot of times we say that fundraising is 20% planning and 80% follow up. You need time to check in with your solicitors. So if you're organizing the campaign, it's important that you see yourself as kind of the conductor of the campaign, and all your team members are folks that you want to check in with. They're your musicians, so to speak. And so checking in with them, making sure they have what they need, giving them updates on the progress of the campaign helps the momentum stay up. And especially, like I said, with a very short campaign, that's really important because there's not a lot of time to kind of slack off. We also need to have buy-in from the campaign team, and we'll talk a little bit more about what a campaign team is and who might be on that campaign. But it's important to have everybody on the team be excited, or be willing, right? They don't have to necessarily know how to do fundraising or be super experienced. They just need to know that this is important, and they need to have a commitment to follow through on the campaign. It's great to have enthusiastic staff leadership, whether that's from you or someone else on staff, your development staff, if you have development staff. An exciting cheerleader, someone who's going to cheer the team on and be that kind of coach and someone to, just give people that energy. That really helps a lot. And of course, you need people to ask. So donor prospects or current donors, you need a list of people that you're going to ask for money. And also you need some kind of system to send thank you notes. So that's hopefully for a lot of you might be automated already if you have an online fundraising system, but making sure there's a way that donors are getting a thank you within 48 hours or 72 hours at the latest of their gift. So that's sort of the standard right now. And above all, you need askers. So you need people to help you do this campaign. It is possible to do a sprint campaign with maybe 2 or 3 people, but with individual donor work, which is what we're focusing on today, you really need as many people as possible to ask more people, right? So if we're asking a broad swath of people, that grouping of people obviously can be much wider and broader if we have more people on our team. So if you don't feel like you have a team of more than, I would say, 4 people maybe at this time, maybe this isn't the right time to do a sprint campaign. You might want to wait until you have more people who are available. And we will talk in a second about what to look for and what to ask people when you're recruiting them to be on your team. But having a team of askers or solicitors or fundraisers is super crucial to having a successful sprint campaign. Okay, so let me just stop there and see if there's any questions. And Stanley, again, let me know if there's stuff going on in the chat. Any questions or comments? Is this landing for you all? The one thing that I don't like about Zoom, I'm a real people person when it comes to training, and it's hard to tell from people's expressions and body language. Is it sort of landing for you? So I really depend on your feedback to let me know.
I had a quick question.
Yes. Can you say your name for me real quick?
Oh, sorry. Jennifer Griffin with Independent Living Resource Center.
Great.
What would be an appropriate number of team members, roughly?
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. So okay. A lot of it depends on how much money you're trying to raise, right? So the more money you're trying to raise, the more people you probably need on your team. But it also depends on who you recruit. So if you had, let's say you were trying to raise $10,000 and you had, 5 people, to me, that's probably a pretty good amount if you have a list already, and or those people have a list of donors they can offer. Like if they're willing to ask their friends and family, 10,000 is a pretty manageable campaign for most organizations, I would say. If they have all the other things, like they're willing to ask, they have the time, all that kind of stuff, that's a good size. And if you have a much bigger campaign, and I'll give you examples in a few minutes of campaigns that were raising like 25,000 and their teams were like 10 to 15 people. And then of course there's staff capacity you want to take into account. When you get a team that's too big, you can't manage them, right? It's hard to manage that big of a team. So yeah, so there's, I would say 5 would be the minimum, just because I feel like that's kind of a critical mass of folks to keep each other kind of motivated. And, 20 maybe, depending on how big your campaign is and how much capacity you have, I would say would be the kind of outer limit. So does that help?
Rona, there's
I
a
have
question.
one more question.
Really quickly in that. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly. So if you're looking for volunteers to help fill out that team of askers, is who you invite any part of the strategy of building the list, or are you looking at those as being separate?
Yes, it can definitely be part of that. And I will get into the recruiting the team a little more in depth in a few minutes. So let's come back to that. But if I forget for some reason, I don't think I will, but please bring it up again. Thank you.
And Rona, Jill in the chat is asking, by team members, are you referring to staff members only?
No, so the team can be pretty much anybody. It can be staff, it can be board, it can be volunteers, it can be donors. And we will talk about that more, but it can be anyone who cares about your mission and is a donor themselves or gives to the organization in some way. So staff don't necessarily have to be donors, obviously, but they are obviously very connected to the organization. But they have to be folks who care about your work and contribute to it in some way already and are willing to ask. So those are the 3 kind of basic things, and we'll talk a little bit more about how you brainstorm some of the folks you might want to ask to be on the team. Hopefully that answers your question for now. Okay, anything else? All right, so let's go forward. So these are the steps, and there's 9 steps, and you might see other presentations that say there's 6 or 7. This is sort of my best thinking of what I see are the things you want to think about, like kind of your checklist when you're planning a sprint campaign like this. We want to make a plan, obviously, and sort of some of the things that go into that are goals, and how are we going to do this fundraising. We want to recruit our team, which we've spent a little time talking about already, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. You want to prepare your campaign materials. So for most of you, I would assume that would be in some online material, like a website or a landing page, or maybe even some online graphics. There's a platform called Canva, which some of you might know about, that I found very useful since a lot of our work has had to transition online and not rely on print. Canva helps you design really beautiful infographics and materials online, and is pretty affordable. So just a little tip on that. And then 4th, you want to identify the prospects. So, and I know that someone had already asked, like, when you recruit the team, are you thinking about who can build your list? If you need a list, if your list is very small, definitely you want to think about who can help you identify more prospects to ask. So those are the first 4 steps. And then the last 5 are really about putting the campaign out into the world. So number 5 is training your team, having some kind of orientation to the campaign with your fundraising team, letting them know, what it is you want them to do, kind of preparing them to go out and do this campaign, right? It can be a very short meeting, half an hour, 45 minutes, but just a way to kind of get them together, make sure everyone's on the same page and understands what they need to do. And then number 6, launch the campaign, right? So after you have that training and orientation, you launch the campaign, and it's out there in the world, and you're doing social media posts or emails or whatever the ways are that you decide you want to put the word out about your fundraising campaign. And then during the campaign, whether it's 5 days or 2 weeks, you want to monitor your campaign, keep track of it. Who's giving, make sure you're giving updates to your askers about which of their prospects have made a gift, right? So they don't go back and keep asking those people if those people have already made a donation. And then just updating people generally about how it's going. That's a really good way to keep the momentum up and inspire people to continue doing their follow-up, continue doing their asks. Okay. And then 8 and 9 are really, again, about kind of supporting your team and then kind of ending the campaign. So by supporting your team, I mean, kind of coaching them, or just asking, letting them ask you technical questions. When you're in the middle of a campaign, there is a fair amount of support, I would say, that your team will need from you. Sometimes people they just want to know, like, oh, I got this email from a donor that had a specific question I don't know how to answer. Can you help me figure out how to answer that kind of thing? And they might have technical questions. Since we're doing everything online, they might say, oh, the donation page isn't working. So you have to be available to kind of help them with those issues. And then finally, the last step, obviously, is to celebrate. Your campaign ends. Hopefully you made your goal, and you want to do some evaluation with your team. You can do that in a meeting. I know a lot of folks are feeling, pretty stretched these days. So, I leave that up to your discretion, whether you have another meeting to kind of pull folks together. It can be nice, but obviously it's optional. These are, going to be some volunteers probably doing your campaign. So we want to make sure that people are thanked for their work mostly and updated on the status of the campaign at the very end. And the evaluation is really nice, but sometimes it's hard to pull that off, especially now. So I'm going to keep going just because we have quite a bit to cover, and we are going to go in depth on all of those steps in a few minutes. But I wanted to first give you a couple examples of sprint campaigns. So this one is actually one that I worked on. This is 6 years ago, so it's a little bit old, but I wanted to give this to you as an example because I actually was one of the fundraisers for this campaign. So I can tell you what I did. So it was 25,000 in 5 days was the goal. And that was because this organization, the Wind Call Institute, which offers retreats and sort of like mini sabbaticals for activists. And I was one of the people that was awarded one of these retreats, which really was very life-changing for me. You get to go to a beautiful place in nature for 3 weeks, all paid for, and kind of reflect on your work as an activist, as a movement person. And a lot of leaders in different movements have gone on the Wind Call retreat, and it's been very rejuvenating and kind of important to their lives. So Wind Call basically called on its alumni, the folks that had gone on those retreats, and asked people, can you help us raise $25,000 in 5 days? We had 13 people in this particular campaign. So not a huge team, but decent sized team who were the fundraisers. And we had a platform online through Mighty Cause, which is one of the kind of crowdfunding platforms that are out there. And we got about 90 donors, I think probably closer to 100. As you'll see, this is the screenshot from the page on Mighty Cause. It didn't actually capture all the gifts, and this was a tech glitch that I think now the tools are much more sophisticated. When we did this campaign, crowdfunding was somewhat new, and some of the platforms for nonprofits were a little not perfect. And so there, we actually did meet the goal of 25,000, but on this page, obviously it looks like we didn't. But we did meet the goal, and we had, more than 90 donors to meet that $25,000 goal. We also had a matching gift. So that was intentional. The staff at Wind Call decided to ask one of their major donors if they would allocate, their gift to be a matching gift, so that we could tell the folks that we were asking that their gift would be doubled. So that provided extra incentive and kind of urgency for people that we were asking to make a donation by a certain time. And we only had 5 days, right? So we really need to motivate our people very quickly. So these are a couple of the fundraising pages that a couple of the fundraisers made. Mine is on the right. And people could write whatever they wanted. I'm sure you've seen pages like this before. People set their own personal goals. I know that I was very busy at the time, so I set kind of a small goal, but I did reach that goal. It's not reflected here, but I reached my goal, within the 5 days. And some people exceeded their goals, like the person on the left. Their goal was 1,000, and they raised $1,200. So that happens too with teams. Like people, set goals, and some people really, go far beyond, and some people don't reach them. Generally, this is why you want several people on your team. It all kind of evens out, right? And so if you set your goals properly, which we'll get to in a second, you should be able to reach your goal if you have enough people and kind of a solid plan. This is another example. This is from, I think, maybe 4 years ago, Iowa Citizens for Community Improvement, which is an advocacy organizing group in Iowa, obviously. They do environmental justice work. And so they also had a 5-day, $25,000 campaign. They sent an email every day to their list for 5 days. And this was a list of their current donors and probably some prospects. They also did peer-to-peer fundraising. So similar to what Wind Call did, they had a team, of people that they had these pages for, and people could sign up to raise a certain goal. But then they also were asking their current donors to make a donation, right? And this was a nice graphic that I just wanted to share that they created to update people on the campaign. I really like this. So, the image on the left is 4 days left. So they sent this to folks, 1 day into the campaign, but they had already raised $14,000. And as you can probably tell, hopefully the picture is a group of their members. And as the goal gets filled up, the picture fills in. And so when you get to the 25,000, it'll be a picture of their members sort of standing, I think maybe at the Capitol, probably at an action. So I liked just the visual of that. I thought that was really nice. Okay, so let's just dig into those steps, right? So step one is probably, it's definitely one of the more important pieces, because this is where you're kind of setting the parameters for the campaign. So making a plan, right? That means setting goals, setting your strategy, and figuring out the timeline for your campaign. And this can take a while. So what are you raising money for? Are you raising money for your general fund? Is there a specific need that you have? People often feel like there needs to be a really, really specific need, like, oh, we need to raise money for a certain program. That's not necessarily the case, but it is important to tell donors when you're asking for a certain amount of money, what their money will do, right? So you can raise money for your general fund, but if you're raising, let's say $10,000, give donors a sense of what can $10,000 or what can their $50 accomplish. So you all have probably seen in when you've seen fundraising pages that organizations may have different, giving amounts that they suggest people make, and they'll say for $50 we can provide a meal at a meeting for our members, that kind of thing. So it's not so much important that you are funding a really specific, like, sort of need or project or program, but it is helpful for donors to understand how much can my gift do, right? What does my gift do? Okay. So what are you raising money for is really your pitch, and we'll talk a little bit more about creating a compelling pitch in a second. How much money you need to raise obviously is really important. Like, do you need 20,000, you need 50,000? And a lot of that is tempered by, what is possible. So I'll give you a tool in a second for how you can kind of reality check what you need versus what's possible to raise, okay? And then the last thing you want to set is just how much time do you have? So your goal is also going to be or constrained, if you want to say that, by how much time do you have? If you're really just going to do 5 days versus 2 weeks, you probably want to just make sure it's not too ambitious of a goal, because you really have to, get everything done in 5 days. If it's 2 weeks, you could probably have a bigger goal if you have a big enough team and enough prospects, but time and capacity is really important to consider as well. Any questions? Just want to make sure I'm not missing anything in the chat. No? Okay, great. So in terms of choosing a timeline for this, so let's just assume you're going to do a 2-week campaign. You might do something shorter, but for a 2-week campaign, I would allow for at least 3 weeks of preparation time, probably more like a month, but 3 weeks is possible if you weren't doing a ton of other things. But I'm assuming most people are doing other things and as well as planning a fundraising campaign. So 3 to 4 weeks to prepare the campaign and plan everything, come up with the plan that we're sort of talking about right now. And then another 3 weeks after a 2-week campaign to do follow-up, whether that's thank yous, making sure that your fundraisers were thanked, your donors were thanked, any follow-up that needed to happen with outstanding pledges was carried out, and then just doing the evaluation and kind of tallying the results of the campaign. Those are all tasks that happen in that follow-up time. So 8 weeks total, ideally more, but that can be 8 weeks can be a good amount of time to pull off a 2-week sprint campaign. So I know that right now there's so many things going on. Some of you may already have decided what your timeline is for your campaign. Some of you may be trying to think about it. And so when I'm working with small groups, I know capacity is always a challenge. I always ask folks to look at, well, what's a period of time where you think you'll have time to, or you can make time to really dedicate to this campaign. So that's where I start. And that's when you should schedule your campaign. Of course, if it's during Christmas or something, probably not. But I would assume most people wouldn't want to do a fundraising campaign right around Christmas. So this time at the end of the year, it gets a little, funny with the holidays. And I'm not sure how COVID is going to impact that, because I know a lot of people aren't traveling. So it's a little bit harder this year to figure this timeline stuff out. But I think starting with capacity and when you have time is always a good thing to look at first. Okay. So this is a tool called the gift range chart that I use often with clients, and this helps people set fundraising goals that are realistic, or to reality check fundraising goals that might be, questionable, or you're not sure whether you can really reach a goal. So when I said earlier, there's a difference between what you need to raise sometimes and what you can raise. This tool is super useful and important to sort of bridge that gap, right? So who has seen this before? Maybe just raise your hand, like, visually if you've seen it before, although a lot of you are not on video. Okay, so a couple people have seen this before. Yeah, so I use this for pretty much any campaign that I work on, small or big. And what this does, and there's also just online versions of this, you could just Google gift range chart and you can actually get like online templates where you can fill in these numbers directly. And so what this does is that it helps you estimate, if you have a certain goal in mind, how many donors you'll need at different levels to reach that goal, right? So this is a sample chart for a $10,000 goal. And I was thinking of a sprint campaign when I created this gift range chart. And what that meant for me is I could probably maybe get a couple of $1,000 gifts for a sprint campaign if there were donors in my donor base that had the capacity. And that's not a huge gift, but it's also not, it's a pretty significant gift for some folks. So this would, these kind of gifts are I'm probably not going to get a whole bunch of them with a sprint campaign since it's so short. I'm not going to do a lot of cultivation, but I might get a few. So I set the highest gift size at 1,000 and the lowest gift size, which is probably going to be the more common one, the most common one, at 25. And from there, I basically use some conventional wisdom in fundraising that the bigger the gift, the less of them we're going to get, right? So maybe, given the size of my particular donor base, I think I could get 3 of those gifts. If I think I can get 3 gifts, that means I actually need to ask 9 people. So you can see on that first line how 3 gifts of 1,000 means I actually have to ask 9 people, because not everyone's going to say yes, right? Some people are going to say no. Some people are going to say not right now. Some people may give at lower amounts. And so that estimate of we need at least 3 times as many people as prospects to get the number of gifts that we want is the math that most fundraisers use to kind of estimate, how much money we think we can raise. And you do that for every gift level that you're expecting, right? So it's not an exact science, but it's pretty accurate, I would say, to sort of help to project what's a realistic goal, right? So if you look at this chart for 10,000 and the gift sizes I put down were between 1,000 and 25, there's a lot more $25 gifts, obviously, but that still means you need to ask a lot of people for $25, right? And this could be done via email, it could be done via text, different strategies. But this just gives you a sense of could we get could we raise $10,000 for this campaign? And if you ask me that as your consultant, I would say, well, do you have 239 prospects, right, that you could ask? If you don't, then we might need to readjust the goal, right? If you have many more than 239, then you might want to readjust the goal higher, right? So let me just stop there because I know this is a lot of info and the gift range chart can be a little confusing, and just see if people have questions about this. Yeah, any comments? Anything in the chat? We're good?
Oh,
go
hi,
ahead.
Kate here from Truth and Recruitment. Yeah, a friend of mine, he did fundraising and he had something where he suggested that we contact people who donated before and ask them for 125% more than they'd given in the past. I ended up, we did the campaign and we just asked for 100% more. So a few people did pay double. I'm just wondering, yeah, I mean, to keep asking people to keep doubling, or you have suggestions about that thing of asking for more from people who've already given.
Yeah, so you definitely do want to ask people for more at some point, and this is where individual donor fundraising, sort of the data that you track is really important, right? So you're going to have different groups of donors that come to you at different times, right? So someone who's giving you $100 now and has been giving you $100 for 5 years, hopefully by the year 3 that they were giving you $100, you ask them for more money, right? Someone who just gave you $100, if you came back to them within 3 months and asked them for double, that doesn't really make sense, right? Because they don't have as long of a relationship with you. So it really depends on how, who your donors are, how long they've been working with you. We'll talk a little bit about segmentation, which is the example I just gave of, the newer donor versus the more long-term donor. Those are 2 different segments of your donor base, and you want to treat those people a little differently because the newer donor needs more time to get to know you, right? You could ask them for more money, and some organizations do. I wouldn't recommend it right away. So the advice your friend gave you makes sense in terms of, yes, at some point you want to upgrade. We call it upgrading in fundraising, your donors, and ask them for more. But we got to look at how long have they been giving to the organization. I recommend people do an upgrade ask after a donor's been giving for 2 years. So there's been a little bit of time they know you and they've been giving consistently over those 2 years, but I wouldn't come back to a donor right away and ask them to double their gift. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Anything else in the chat? I see a few things kind of popped up, but no. Okay. All right, so any questions about the gift range chart? Okay, let's keep going. So step 2, which you all had a lot of questions about, recruiting your team of solicitors. So, you know, it's really important to have a team. It's also just more fun. You know, fundraising with donors is much more fun than, you know, with fundraising from foundations. Although we have certain foundations we love, like the Fund for Santa Barbara, but it's fun because you get to do it with a bunch of people, right? That can be really exciting and just energizing. And so, who are the kinds of people you can recruit? As I said before, it can really be anybody who cares about your mission. It can be board members, staff, volunteers. If you have alumni, the organization I mentioned earlier, Wincall Institute, had a big list of, you know, several hundred alumni. So it made sense for them to go to the alumni and say, hey, can you be on this fundraising team? They were direct beneficiaries of the main program of the organization, right? So it depends on the organization. Who do you have at your disposal who could really speak to your mission and hopefully speak directly, you know, in terms of the impact of the organization's work on their lives, right? That's the ideal kind of fundraiser. And so sometimes those people are donors. Some people may cross these different identities, right? I'm assuming your board members are also donors. Some of your allies or alumni hopefully will be donors. Everybody on your fundraising team, however, should be a donor, because if they're going out and asking for money for your organization, they should also be giving to the organization. So really it can be anybody. There are some rules, I would say, for or expectations for campaign team members. So we're not just going to ask anybody. we can ask lots of people, but we want to focus on people who care about our cause, our donors, as I said before, who are willing to ask for money. So they don't have to be experts at it, right? They don't have to know how to do it really, really well. They might even be a little bit scared. That's okay. You can coach them and give them the confidence and the tools and the training to be more confident in asking, but they have to be willing to do it. And also they have to have at least an hour a day, I would say, for a sprint campaign to do the work of the campaign. So that's just going to be contacting their donors, following up, maybe posting on social media. They do need some time, you know, during that very short window, 2 weeks or less, to work on the campaign, right? So if someone says, I'm just really too busy, I can't do it. Okay, thank you very much. We'll ask you next time, right? It's totally fine to move on to the next person on your list if someone doesn't feel like they have the time. And then the last thing is they need to be able to follow directions and keep track of their work. And that sounds maybe a little condescending or a little common sense, but because I think especially now that everything's remote and everything sort of relies on technology, I find it can be a little bit harder to sort of help people stay on track. And people are just dealing with so many different things, right? So, you know, people who are maybe, it takes them a little bit longer to figure things out, or you know, maybe, you know, haven't done this kind of campaign before. I'm not saying we can't recruit them. They just might need more support. So it's just really important that folks are able to follow directions and kind of track their work so that you can know what they did and which donors they talked to, and do your job later of following up with people if needed. So let me stop there because I know that folks had a lot of questions about the team, and see if you still have questions, or hopefully some of my presentation has answered some of those. Any questions about the team members?
Well, I do again. I was just about to type this in the.
Oh, did I miss your question?
No, I
Did
was
forget
just starting to
it?
type
Okay.
when you opened it for questions, but
Okay.
my question is around the tools that you've used in the past that would help volunteers track their effort. I don't know I don't know a lot about the crowdfunding tools, and if they allow people to track who they've contacted and when and things like that, and or if what other tools are good to use.
Yeah, you know, and I haven't done a crowdfunding campaign in a couple of years, so I'm not up on like what's the latest technology. It's changing a lot. I don't think, you know, it's interesting. I don't think there's a good way of, I don't think a lot of these platforms have a way for fundraisers to track who they asked. I think they assume that I could be wrong, but I know there's one that I've used before that does show, I think, who you might have emailed to, or you can write it down. So I'd have to research that and get back to you. But I'm hoping that there's at least some that allow you to do that. Internally, you should have some way to do that as well, right? Because you want to track, you know, how many people are being contacted versus give, that kind of thing. But that's a good question. I'm actually not sure. Does anyone else know who's used crowdfunding platforms more recently than I have? If there's a service you would recommend, or that allows for fundraisers to track who they asked? That was your question, right? Mm-hmm.
And Megan,
Yeah,
your
I
name's on
can
the Oh yeah,
Yeah,
go
I can
ahead.
jump in, Stanley. Sorry. Hi, this is Megan.
it.
I'm with Unite to Light. We just did, it wasn't necessarily a sprint campaign. We did it about over a month, but we did a crowdsource 5K, virtual 5K fundraiser just this last month in September. And it was really a huge success. And just kind of, I put this in the chat, but people really wanted to help. And I know it's sometimes we think like, oh, I don't know if I want to ask. So people have so many things going on. It's a stressful time, but we really found that people that wanted to help just jumped both feet in and were so excited to do something different and new and fun. We use the software called Flipcause. And they do a whole bunch of things in addition to crowdfunding, and for small nonprofits who are kind of looking at like starting a CRM process or getting a new CRM in place, I'd advise talking to them because they've got some pretty good prices and a lot of helpful tools. They don't allow fundraisers to track who they've asked, but they do allow you to track on the back end. And they also send a lot of automated emails. So if a fundraiser gets a donation to their page, then they automatically get an email. You get an email as the organizer, and then there's reports that you can pull. So I was doing that essentially on a weekly basis, letting people know who gave, who and where they were at towards their fundraising goals. But it was a pretty good platform. There's if you are interested in using it, I would say maybe just ping me. I'd happy to talk to anybody about kind of pros and cons about it. But we did find that it was pretty good for what was out there given the cost, and it's tailored to small nonprofits, which is nice.
Would you say the name of that again?
Flipcause. I put it in the chat as well.
Flipcause.
FILIPCAUSE. I'll put the link into the chat. That'll be even easier for you guys.
Thank you. Yeah, and I've heard,
Thanks so much,
I
Megan.
remember that I have heard good things about Flipcause as well. So yeah, so thank you for sharing your experience. In terms of other tools, if you don't have a CRM that can track it, or there isn't sort of that capacity for some of these platforms, people are using Google Sheets. I know it sounds very rudimentary, but it's, it's cloud-based. Anybody can access it. You could have a different tab for each fundraising team member, and have them just track who they're asking on that list. That can also be good to make sure that people aren't asking the same people. Although some, the two examples I gave earlier of those crowdfunding campaigns, I talked to the development directors at those groups, and they said, they didn't care since those campaigns were so short. They didn't have the capacity to kind of vet the list and make sure people weren't getting multiple asks, and they were kind of okay with that. They were like, that's okay, people get multiple asks. It just, that means that they'll see how important and urgent the campaign is. So, so Google Sheets can be, sort of the low level, low tech version. Hopefully all your team members have an internet connection. I think most people do now, but that would be another option. So
I know
any
that
other questions? Yeah.
I'm just gonna share. I know at the fund, when we do our solicitations for Bread and Roses or our annual fundraiser, that we use Excel typically, but we actually put those solicitations on Google Sheets so that as staff is out and about, different meetings and things like that, that they can access that on the cloud and on their phone. And that's a really good way just to be reminded not only of, let's say it's a corporate sponsor that we're asking have a request for, but also like who are the solicitors for those gifts, so that whether it's touching base with them or just saying thanks to them, right, for participating in this, can be really helpful just to have in one place on the go.
Yeah. The nice thing is we have so many tools now. It's almost like it's a little overwhelming, sometimes. And, so yeah, Google Sheets, Google Docs in general can be a really great way to manage teams that are remote, right? That aren't all in one place physically, which your teams won't be for COVID and for various reasons. So let me keep going since you're going to do some stuff now. We're about an hour in, and I want to make sure you all get some small group time and then a break. But now you're going to get a chance to kind of delve into planning a little bit. So, I'm going to have Stanley break you all into small groups of about 4 people. And I'm going to ask you to answer at least 2 of these questions for your own organization. You can answer more if you want, but I think, trying to get to 2, we don't have, tons of time. getting to 2 will at least get you moving forward a little bit in your planning. And some of you, I know that one person had said that their campaign is coming up pretty soon. You might already have answered all these questions, in which case you can just maybe share like what your organization's plans are. You know, what are you raising money for? How much do you want to raise? And so if you could answer at least 2 of these questions in your small group and share them with your small group members, and then we'll do that for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have a break pretty much right after that. But we'll come back to the large group first, and then we'll break after that. Does that sound good? Anybody have any questions about the exercise? Make sense?
Great. Now
All
I'll make sure to send you all the questions in your groups as well. And you all will, yeah, so I'll assign you all to breakout rooms, and then towards the end of our time, you'll see a little countdown for when we'll rejoin this main room. So I'll go ahead and start those now.
Great, thank you, Stanley. Have fun.
Everybody.
So funny, everybody just disappears.
I know, it's always so weird.
And then it happens like immediately. It's like, they're just gone. So funny. Anyway.
And I think I accidentally, well, I didn't know
that's
how to
fine. I know I got an invite. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Figured, yeah. And then let me just send these to that.
Yeah.
Broadcast. Oh, shoot, did I already send?
I forgot they can't see the slide while they're in the breakout.
I know, me too. I think of at least 2. Oh, no.
Depends on the group, but hopefully you can find something that works for you all. So yeah, it's a
Yeah,
tough time.
and Ken, knowing your board, I feel like they're pretty closely tied with the election. I would assume. You know.
Oh yeah, one of them's running for a school board.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They're all probably, many of them are making phone calls and on that.
Yeah.
So I think we have to wait till after it, and then it's going to be touch and go as to how long after it we should wait, because depending what happens, we could all be glued to our televisions for days or weeks.
Yeah.
and
Right.
Not wanting to take the time to do this.
Don't do that, Ken.
What's that?
Well, and
Yeah, don't
just
get
want-
glued to the TV.
Give people
I
something
won't.
to get distracted by. I think that the
Right.
thing is there is like, how do you connect? How do you get people's attention, right? Like if they are glued to the TV, how does your mission, how does your pitch like address the moment, but still bring it back to your group, right? That's the
Yeah.
hard part, because we don't know what's going to happen. So we have to maybe, like one of the groups I'm working with has a few different pitches they're preparing because they don't know, but they feel like their work isn't going to change too much, but the messaging is going to change depending on what's happening in the world. So it's tough.
when I was doing more of our communications and development at the fund, one thing that I would really use as that kind of pivot point was this idea that a lot of the antidote to feeling overwhelmed about national and international level news for me personally is very much this idea that like working at the local level you can really make an impact. And so, and there's obviously like national level issues that hit home as well.
Yeah. So it looks like folks are all back. I just realized that. Sorry about that, folks. We were having a little chat. Didn't see that you all returned. So we're going to actually take a break. We'll do a debrief of the small group after the break, but I want to make sure I give you all a quick bio break. So it's 12:45 right now. Can we come back at 12:50? So in just 5 or 6 minutes, and we'll start up again at 12:50. Sound good?
And we'll keep this open too if anybody
Yes.
wants to chat with one another.
in there. We have about 40 minutes left. Just wanted to see if anyone wanted to share anything exciting that came up or interesting that came up in your small group, just as a quick debrief. I know Ken had already talked about he was planning to start his campaign right after this call and now is realizing, maybe I need to delay a little bit and do it at a time that my team's going to be more prepared. Anyone else want to share either in the chat or audio? You can just unmute yourself. Anything that came up in your small group?
I got to learn more about 2 organizations that weren't on my mind, and I'm really excited. I want to get involved with them.
Oh,
So
that's great.
yeah, so I was in the meeting with Jill, Art from Scrap, and Megan with Unite to Light.
Great.
Just exciting. I'm like,
New
okay,
connections.
I'm going to be going to their websites as soon as I'm off of this call.
Oh, great. I love that. That's
Yeah.
great. Thank you. Anyone else?
And I also wanted to comment on this idea of a sprint campaign, because I never heard of it before. I think it makes a lot of sense to me, because I've been in campaigns before where we've got 2 months, and so I spend 6 weeks fretting about it and then 2 weeks actually doing it. So
Right. Most
it might
campaigns
be
probably
better.
end up being sprints in reality, but we
It
just
ends
don't
up
realize
being
it.
sprint at the end anyway. So
Right.
why don't we just plan it to be, spend that time planning and get ready and then do it.
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that'll be helpful for us.
Yeah.
Great. We were wondering if we were going to cover a little more, and you might be getting to this, about the fact that the 5-day example sounded really appealing. So maybe like talking about the difference between a 5-day and a 2-week, which was your basic model.
What's the difference? I think you just have to be a lot more organized and have a really strong team. So, because it goes by fast. I mean, which is what I like about it, because it's just over, right? But for like a 1 over 2 week for both teams, I would recommend having like a suggested schedule for your team. Like say, like I said, the thing about having an hour a day that they're gonna. But for like a 5-day, I would say I would even ask my team, like, when are you going to plan to work on this? Like, can you schedule out in your calendar? I know this sounds very prescriptive and bossy, but I'm a Capricorn, so I also get a lot of stuff done. So, I might ask my team, like, can you all pick a time, like put it in your calendar when you're going to work on this campaign? Because yeah, you'll see when we go into some of the other details, follow-up is really important. So they'll send an email or contact their folks, and then those people might email them back. And so it's not just like you send out a big ask and then you're done. Like you have to actually keep on the tasks. So for a 5-day, that would, to me, would be probably the thing that I'd be more picky about, is like, 1, do people really have the time? And 2, can I get them to really even like carve out that time more deliberately, because it is only 5 days and then we're kind of through. The other thing that I didn't mention before, I can't remember if it's going to be later in my presentation, for a shorter campaign, having either kind, 2 weeks or 5 days or 10 days, whatever, but for especially a shorter, like a 5-day, having planted donors, like people you've already like primed to make. Ideally, it doesn't have to be a big gift, but maybe like a medium size to big gift. So you already know they're going to give, and you tell them, make your gift, the first day or the second day. That can at least sort of get your campaign kind of going, and just sort of create some excitement. And so that's another thing I would say, definitely for 5 days, have probably a couple, maybe 2 or 3 planted donors, hopefully at the higher levels too. So you're already getting to your goal before the campaign starts. So hopefully that's helpful.
And sometimes those could be donors that, and I'm sorry, Rona, you may have just said this, but yeah, they may be donors that will already give before year end, or
right,
and you could just ask them to do it during that window.
Exactly.
Sorry if
yeah,
you just
exactly.
said that.
Totally. Okay, so let's keep going, because we actually do have a fair amount of ground to cover still. So step 3, after you've done the planning and recruited your team, those are the 2 steps, right? Yeah, so you're going to prepare your campaign materials, right? So this is your pitch, and this can be, anything, right now everything's virtual, so I'm assuming you're doing email. Some people might still be doing snail mail, but either way, you want to make sure you have a compelling, appeal, a compelling pitch in whatever materials you're sending out. If you're having folks design their own fundraising pages, like I had shown you earlier, making sure you give them even just a little template, could be just like, here's the components of a good pitch. so that, you know, even though they're writing their own, you want to make sure they're kind of hitting the main points of what you want to cover in your pitch. Segmentation is best. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. So if you're sending like an e-blast to folks or an appeal letter, making sure as much as you can, I know it can take a lot of time and resource, and you may not have, your database may not be set up to do this, but segmenting at least for new people, like people who've never given to your organization, and current donors, so that the letter or the email they're getting is slightly different. So current donors should start with, thank you for being a donor, and then get into, you know, can we renew your gift, or the ask. Whereas people who've never given to you before, they don't need the thank you because they've never given, and they should just be, the rest of the letter can be the same as for the current donor, but the current donor should get a thank you, right? So those are the two basic segments. There's other ones which I don't have time to get into today, but segmentation is best because it's more personalized, and it lets the donor know that you're acknowledging their relationship to your organization, that you're not clueless about, you know, whether they gave before or not, right? You want to have some kind of reply device, whether that's a donate page. If you're doing snail mail, then a reply card to reply device. I hope that you already have some of these in place already. Sometimes for specific campaigns, for tracking purposes, people create unique links or unique pages for a specific campaign because that can help them with tracking. So that's really more dependent on your particular system that you use. Some people use CRMs that create unique links for campaigns kind of automatically. So that's sort of a preference thing for you. And obviously you want to have some background materials, mostly for your askers. I find that a lot of donors don't really request a lot of materials, but fundraisers, the people who are your volunteer or your staff fundraisers even, often feel like they need a lot of stuff to feel confident to ask people for money. So it's good to give people, you know, talking points, or if, you know, you can direct them to your website, or if there's a specific thing you're fundraising for this campaign, you know, having a little more detail than what's in the pitch about what that specific project is, or program, or whatever it is that you're fundraising for. So that helps your fundraisers be more confident. I'll be honest and say a lot of times the fundraisers don't even end up using a lot of the materials, but it's like they like to have it. It's kind of like a security blanket. You know, it's like, if I have a question, I have this list of things I can look at, right? So those are kind of the basic aspects of the materials you want to use or have prepared. Just to talk a little bit about what makes a strong fundraising appeal. I talked a little bit already about segmentation. You want to acknowledge the reader of the appeal's relationship to your organization, whether they're a past donor, current donor, lapsed donor, all those things. We want to have some kind of emotional story. It doesn't have to be like a tearjerker, but something that, you know, sort of tugs on people's or appeals to people's hearts, right? In fundraising, we talk a lot about appealing to people's kind of heart space. So I'll give you an example in a second. And also a personal story, if, especially if you have a fundraising team, making sure that they're talking about their own personal connection to the organization, because they'll be asking sometimes their friends, hopefully, and family for money. And so that personal connection they have to your work will really, resonate with the people that they're asking. We want to talk about why we're asking now, right? What is the urgency, if there is any, around asking at this particular moment? And then we want to ask for a specific amount and have a specific goal that we mention to the donor as well. So a dollar amount, right? And this is, I did a screenshot of the fundraising page that I had created for the Win Call event, or the Win Call campaign that I showed you earlier. This is a screenshot of part of my pitch that I wrote on my fundraising page. So I just wanted to call your attention to the kind of first full paragraph. It's bolded. I'm writing to ask you to join me in supporting and celebrating Win Call's 25th anniversary. So I say immediately, my goal is to raise 500 by this date. If you give today, your gift will be doubled. If you make a gift of $75 or more, you get a poster, right? So I'm pretty specific early on. And then I get into my personal story. So the paragraph that starts, when I went to Win Call, is my connection to Win Call, right? I was exhausted after helping lead a statewide organization through a challenging leadership transition. I had lost my passion. So the people that care about me, who gave to my campaign, I'm telling them, why is this group important to me, right? This group, helped me rejuvenate so I could come back to the movement for all these different reasons. And then I outlined them here. So that's just an example of how someone's personal story can really, kind of make a mission of an organization kind of come to life, right? Any questions about this before I move on? Just your pitch or your materials? Anything in the chat coming up?
I was just wondering, because I really liked that Win Call that, the alumni each did their own individual fundraising thing. If you had information about that specific tool that you used.
I can look it up. It's called, I believe it was called Mighty Cause. And the thing is, technology changes so fast and might be called something else now. They might have gotten bought by another company, but I believe it was Mighty Cause, and I'll put that in the chat. Or actually, Stanley, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time accessing the chat. Could you type that in for me? It's just mightycause.org, I believe. And there's other ones as well, but that's the one that we used. Trying to think, does anyone else have any platforms that they use for crowdfunding campaigns? And if so, maybe you could just drop them in the chat if there's ones that you liked a lot, and we'll just keep going. Any other questions about the pitch, about materials? Okay. All right, so step 4 is identifying donor prospects. So this is your list. Who are you going to ask? And so this could be your current donors for sure. It could be lapsed donors, so maybe people who haven't given. So current donors are generally people who've given in the last like 12 to 18 months. You can define for yourself and your organization what you consider current. I consider it with someone who's given within the last 12 to 18 months. Lapsed donors are people who've given in the past, but beyond that timeline, right? But you know, since they've given in the past, that they probably have some affinity for your work still. And then prospects are people who've never given to your organization before, right? And these are a good place to, this is where your team can be really helpful. So I know that someone had asked earlier, like when you're recruiting your team, do you want to take into account, can they bring in new prospects? And definitely, especially if you don't have a large donor base already, and you're trying to build the donor base, for sure, I would ask the people on your team, do you know anyone else who you think might want to give to this organization, and gather those names, and they should ask those people, right? Those are their people that they have relationships with. And other people, even if they're not on the fundraising team, can also be a source of prospects, right? So, and then I mentioned earlier already the planted donors thing. The current donors can be a really good source of planted donors to kind of get your campaign off to a strong start. So this is how you get your list together. And then step 5 is conducting the orientation and training for your team, right? So this is where you go over all the campaign materials, go over your pitch, your message, you review kind of the tasks. And I talked earlier, for a very short campaign, you might even want to ask people to commit like from 4 to 5 p.m. every day, I'm going to work on this campaign, right? You brainstorm prospects at this meeting, and you just thank your team, right? These are people who are giving of their time to help you raise money. They don't have to do this if they're volunteers, right? And you want to just appreciate them and say thank you for giving of their time for this important work. So actually, let me stop there for a second. I see some things in the chat. Any questions or comments folks have about the identifying donor or prospects and conducting the training? And as you can see, the training will probably be on Zoom or some kind of video conference platform. Okay, keeping going. So then the next thing after you've done your training orientation is to launch the campaign. So I like to do the training pretty much like the day before I'm going to launch, or a couple days before, so that, you know, it's kind of like getting at the starting blocks for a race. You know, you're just, everybody's gathered and we get them pumped up, get them excited. And then the next day we're going to, you know, we're going to take off, right? The shotgun goes off and we're starting to run, and especially for a sprint campaign, right? Literally, we're just like, we got to take off and just keep going really, really fast. So you send out your letters or emails, whatever the strategy is that you're going to use to contact donors, or you send, you know, social media posts. You can do a sprint campaign purely on social media. I would recommend doing something more direct, like an email or a letter, in addition to. Some folks have had very successful sprint campaigns that are purely on social media. But I would say in that case, you want to make sure that your team obviously is very, very social media savvy and is on social media a lot, because they're going to need to keep up with people commenting on their posts. You know, you want to make sure they're sharing it widely. So you can do any and all of the above, but making sure that your team is comfortable with the tools that you're using to get the word out about the campaign. And then once the emails are out, you know, I would give folks a chance, maybe a day, to kind of receive the materials if they're getting them in an email or letter, and then you want to follow up, right? So your team should be sending people texts or emails. You can decide with your team what makes the most sense, both for their contacts and also for their time. Some people, you know, use email primarily, text. For me, I usually, when I'm doing a fundraising campaign, I go with what I think, the way that I know the donor likes to be communicated with. So for each of your fundraising team members, it may vary. They may need to use multiple channels, multiple methods for contacting their donors and following up and making sure they get asked to give. And I'm sorry, I should have said earlier in the campaign materials, another thing it's good to provide your fundraising team is templates for all of these things. So even for texts, like some people they really kind of freak out about having to ask for people's money over text or following up over text. So it's giving them a template that they can edit themselves and make it more in their own voice, but giving them something to kind of work with for text or emails and a script for the phone calls is really helpful and just helps them boost their confidence, right? Okay. Any questions? Anything coming up in the chat, Stanley? Are we good?
No, not that I'm seeing.
Okay, great, no problem. All right, so I mentioned this earlier. So even if you're doing like an email-based campaign, hopefully if you do have social media streams, you should talk about your campaign online, right? You should talk about your campaign on your social media feeds and make sure that you're, because a lot of people are also on social media, so they might be getting email from you, but they're also checking their Facebook, they're checking their Twitter, they're checking different things. So if you have those, that presence available to you, I would also post online about your campaign, right? To just drum up kind of interest and kind of hype up the campaign in as many different ways as possible.
Are you saying to start the drum up before the actual like 5 days or 10 days?
You could, yeah, you can do that. I was talking about during the campaign, but you can also do it before. And that's actually a really good idea because you don't necessarily need your team to do much before the campaign, but you as a staff person could definitely be posting on your own organizations like social media. You know, we're going to launch this 5-day campaign in 2 days, right? You might find you get donations before the campaign even started when you do that, right? So yes, for sure, you can do it before. But I was also saying during the campaign, you want to be sharing online and encouraging your team, your fundraising team, to be sharing and posting online as well. But thank you, that's a great question. Okay, so then the campaign's launched, you're going, it's day 1, day 2, day 3, and you want to keep track of, you know, what's happening, right? So stay in touch with your team members. It's a short campaign. People are busy. You want to make sure that you're just, they know that this campaign is active, is live. You know, you might want to send them updates. As for a short campaign, like 5 days, probably a daily update would be what I would recommend. You know, you might even want to send texts to some people to just say, how's it going, right? So just stay in touch with folks, update them as often as you can. I think this is an error. I put here an email a weekly report. It should be really like a daily or every few days report for a sprint campaign. So I apologize about that. And then, you know, when you're doing updates with folks, have them share stories or you share stories about when you're having contact with donors, right? Or hey, we got a big gift from, you know, a donor that we've never gotten money from before, right? Thank you guys so much for helping make this happen. So again, just different ways to kind of keep the energy up and the momentum going, right? And you, of course, will be tracking all these gifts as they come in and updating your Google Sheet or whatever the vehicle is that you're using to kind of track this information back to your fundraising team. We also want to make sure that your thank yous are going out, right? So hopefully you have an automated system that's taken care of. Some people like to do a personalized thank you in addition to the automated. That's always really nice. It really just depends on your capacity. You could have, ideally, it would be great to have the fundraising team write their own thank yous, you know, either like an email or a postcard or something, or a text, you know, really anything to acknowledge the donors that are giving to you, right? So making sure you're thanking your donors during the campaign, because thanking people, honestly, it helps prime them for the next gift, right? It can also even prime them for getting other people helping to fundraise for you. You know, if they're like, oh, I really love this organization, I give them $100. Maybe I'll share the social media post, even though they're not on the fundraising campaign, right? So thanking people is just another way to get them excited about your work. And as you do your campaign, just keep in mind, I mentioned this earlier, but fundraising really is like 20% planning and 80% follow-up. Like we plan something, we get the appeal out there, and then we just have to keep checking with people. Hey, did you get the email? Hey, can you make a gift? You can make a gift, great. Then they don't make a gift. Hey, I thought you were gonna make a gift. Could you make your gift today? Right? There's a lot of like follow-up. And especially if your folks on the team are newer to fundraising, they might not realize that. So reminding them too to follow up with folks until you get like a yes, and you get the gift in, right? Just making sure that you're following with people and doing it in a friendly way, not in a pushy way, but just in a friendly but persistent way, right? Okay. So the last step before we end the campaign And this is all happening kind of concurrently, right, as the campaign is happening. But it's just supporting your team. So I talked already about just staying in touch with folks, being available, making sure there's time in your day to answer any questions they have. You know, if they're going to be reaching out to donors, whether it's over email or phone or whatever, there may be questions that come up that they can't answer. They may be having technical problems with the platform that you're using. You know, there can be various things that are going on. They may have a personal crisis that comes up in the middle of the campaign, right? And so, you know, we want to make sure that we're available to our team to kind of help them troubleshoot any problems that come up and just support them. And also a buddy system. Sometimes people use that for bigger campaigns. Like if you have a big team, maybe like more than, you know, 12 to 15 people, like 20 people, and they know each other, you might want to buddy people up together so they can, you know, role play pitches together. They might just want to check in with each other. So that kind of takes the onus off of you a little bit to have to check in with each person individually, but it still gives your team some level of support from someone to kind of stay on the campaign and stay on their tasks. And just keep in mind that it's very normal for people to flake. That's why we try to recruit more people than we kind of, you know, need in some ways for the campaign. Some people will flake or they just won't be able to reach their goal for whatever reason. And so that's just normal. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It's just the way things are. But usually there will be also the equal number of people who will be really excited and who will exceed their goals and who'll do like amazing. And sometimes those people are completely not the people you expected to do amazing on a fundraising campaign. It's really, you really don't know until you do the campaign who's going to excel and who is going to be, you know, kind of like not as motivated, right? Okay. So the last step is, you know, the campaign is over, you've hopefully met your goal, and you know what you want to do, you know, maybe a day before or the day, you know, the day after. It can be towards the end or at the end of the campaign. It's just bring your team back together, as many people that can attend, like a short little check-in, you know, review the progress. Hopefully you met your goal, maybe share some stories about what happened and thank people, you know, give them props, like thank them for participating. Maybe there was really, maybe there were challenging issues that your team were able to overcome or were able to address on their own. Who knows? There can be like just fun stories and fun victories that you can celebrate as a team. And then if you're meeting with folks before the campaign's over, you want to rally for a final push, right? And even if the campaign is over, if they seem like they have time, you might want to ask them to do a final round of like follow-up, right? If they feel like they have the time to do that with people who maybe made a pledge but didn't fulfill the pledge to give. Okay. And then obviously you want to celebrate. Yay, we finished the campaign, you know, give a big round of applause and evaluate. And evaluation just means, you know, getting some feedback from folks about how that went for them. What are things that you could do better next time? And even for yourself internally, like what are the things you want to do differently next time? And also what went well. You know, I think evaluation, sometimes we focus a lot on the negative, but it's important to acknowledge like sort of what went well, what happened that was really positive and was a success. So I'm going to stop there, and this is where we get to spend the last few minutes just doing Q&A and any kind of other comments or lessons people want to share from their own experience. So let's just open it up now to you all. And you feel free to unmute yourselves and go ahead and shout out any questions or comments you have. Okay, well, I have a question for you all. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's been a really good learning experience for me. I think you've really been comprehensive about how this type of fundraising works, and I think it'll be helpful for what we're going to be doing.
Great, glad to hear it. Yeah, it's not rocket science, you know, it's just a little bit of organization and some enthusiasm and you know, some tools, but it's not something that is that hard to do.
And one other thing I noticed during the bio break that Stanley started talking about Nation Builder. SBCAN uses Nation Builder for our database, for getting donations, for sending out action alerts. One thing we haven't used it for is actually fundraising, but I understand it has some really good tools in there for that. So I'm going to do some research on that and see if that won't help us. I'm sure it will, if just we learn how to do it.
Oh, great. And I'm not sure if you were here, Jeannie, when I mentioned it. I think it sounds like SB Bike also uses Nation Builder. Heather was on the call earlier. So maybe
Oh,
that's
she's
a
on.
possible peer-to-peer.
Yeah, I'll write that down. Heather SB Bike.
You say
And with that-
nation builders?
Nation Builder,
Nation
it's a
Builder?
platform, a constituent resource management platform. It's pretty common in electoral campaigns, but I know of some groups like SB can and use them to kind of track engagement with members, and things like that.
We use ours primarily, I guess, in 3 ways. We have it for a website, and people can make donations through the website. So we track
Oh,
that, and then
okay.
we send out action alerts from that, and we can tell who's responded to the action alerts. It also tells us what emails are no longer working. Did I say 3 ways? Action alerts, website. I don't know what I'm saying, but anyway, I know there's more to it, and that we use it a lot for communications, and it does have that our database of who's given what through the website.
You can do advocacy through Nation Builder as well, right? Is the capacity to like send letters to legislators, that kind of thing?
I
not sure.
think it does. We haven't used it that
Okay. Yeah, there's so many of these CRMs are so powerful. It's like kind of crazy. A lot of them can do many, many, many things. So if you do have a CRM that you feel like you're underutilizing, schedule a demo with a salesperson, or not a salesperson, but some customer service person, because there might be fairly easy ways to use your CRM that you didn't realize you can use it for. Kim Klein, my mentor, says that a CRM or database should be like having an extra staff person. That's how we should think about it, because it should help us do a lot of work that we would not be able to do on our own. 30 years ago, 20 even years ago, we used to do a lot of this stuff on paper. Maybe 30 years ago. I'm dating myself a little. But now we have these very powerful, systems that can help us do so many things. So, yeah.
And I know this can even track engagement of like our members, everyone who signs up to get our action alerts, gets an account on there, and we can see, whether they've sent out anything or what kind of involvement they have. But those are tools we haven't been using. So there's a lot more we could get out of it if we were to research it.
And in my experience, like Rona was saying, calling the company, they're more than, because they obviously want to, be responsive to their clients. And so oftentimes I'll have free trainings and things like that.
Yeah.
And Elsa, I see that you have your hand up as well.
Elsa?
Right, yes. Hi, Rona. I was wondering if you could speak to, so after you've gone through all of your steps and you secure a pledge from someone, and this has happened to me on numerous occasions, where I secure a pledge, I do friendly reminders and multiple friendly reminders in different ways, self-addressed stamped envelope, here's our link to our donate, and then still the pledge doesn't come through. Can you give me a sense about what you do, how many times you follow up in a friendly way, and at what point do you just let it go?
Yeah. And that's normal. I wouldn't say, of course, if that's happening to you, I don't know what the statistic is, but maybe like more than, 10% of the time, then something's kind of not right there. But it happens, people either they get busy or they change their mind and they're too like, they don't feel like they can say that to you. Who knows? I say 3 times is like the nice, if you can do 3 follow-ups, and that can be anything, right? It could be like a text, an email, a postcard. It could be a combination of those things. Then if I don't get an answer either way, then forget it. I would also say, if you hopefully in your follow-up, like especially after the second time, maybe just to say, hey, it's totally fine if this isn't a good time for you, just to give them an out, because they might want to say no and they feel like they can't say no to you because, you're friends. Or so sometimes I just like to give people an, could you let me know by a certain date or a certain, so that you just create a little bit of urgency, and also just let them know like what's most important is your relationship and not so much like that they make a donation, because so those are just a couple ideas. But yeah, I would say 3 times is nice if you can get to that, and then stop. And maybe they'll give the next time. Hopefully if you give them an out though, and or a deadline, they'll at least get back to you and say no, or maybe ask me next time, or yes. And even they say yes, they still might not do it, but you try, you did all you could, and that's all you can do, right? Yeah. So good question. Anybody else have any questions? And if not, then I'm interested in answering the question that Stanley put in the chat as way of a kind of checkout. Do we have time for that, Stanley? Or yeah.
Yeah.
So do you want to say what the question was that you put in the chat?
Yeah, just wanted to kind of hear if folks felt comfortable, kind of what are some next steps that your organization might consider, even if that's considering a campaign like this, or if it's, you know, developing your team, whatever it is. Just if folks wanted to share either takeaways or next steps with the group.
Hi,
Yeah,
it's Kate. So, yeah, one thing that I thought might be interesting is to ask some people who have been regular donors, but even just like I was saying in the small group that we have these people, you know, they maybe have only given 35, but they've given $35 for like 4 years, and like seeing if they would be part of a team, because they obviously really care about the organization, and maybe they can only give so much. So I don't know, I just thought that was an interesting idea to move beyond and to actually ask some of these donors who are seem like they're very supportive of the work.
That's great.
Yeah.
Good idea.
This is Diana. I was thinking, so part of the Veggie Rescue's issue is that they have a lot of grant support and have very little individual contributions. So for me, this is feeling like a great way to raise money and raise our individual donor database and local outreach. So it kind of seems like it would solve a couple of our issues at the same time.
That's great.
Have the same exact thing, Diana, where we have grants and contracts and not many individual donors. So it's really exciting to think about. But if we'd never done peer-to-peer fundraising, we just reach out to people like our supporters and kind of just, it's a new thing for us. So I'm excited to try it and a little scared.
It's a little scary, you know, yeah, it's scary, but I think I compare it to like stage fright, like anyone, or even like if you're an athlete, I'm assuming you get nervous, right before a big game, you still do it, right? It's like, I'm afraid, but that doesn't mean it has to stop you from getting it done. And I find when I'm talking to donors or interacting with them, even on email, it's actually really energizing. Like it's, I don't know if other folks have had that experience, but I always have a good experience. You know, it's very rare that you get, especially because most of the time you're contacting people you know, or that know your group, or friendly in that way. They're not going to just hang up on you. And, you know, people have all these, and I know that happens too. I've done all kinds of fundraising, including like telemarketing. And when it's cold like that, yes, there's a lot of more rejection. But for people that are warmer prospects, we call them, people are usually really happy to hear you. And I think now, especially, I know someone mentioned this earlier, people really want to connect. You know, there's not many opportunities to connect. So a phone call is kind of welcome now more than it has been in the past. So let's use that to our advantage to connect with people and invite them to support our work.
And I know that, depending on what your board of directors is like, that could be a really good starting point. Just as folks who already know the work you're doing, who are already kind of charged with being kind of ambassadors of your work, even if they haven't engaged in that sort of like individual donor development, they could be a good first step, and they might have ideas. I know at the fund, we've had board members think about like bringing other people into the mix and to help with that work.
Anyone else want to share any next steps you want to pursue after this training?
Yeah, go ahead. Pat, you're on mute though. If you can hear me, Pat, the mute button is on the bottom left of your screen. There you go.
I just spent an hour earlier on the GoFundMe campaign type of thing. What is there a possibility to use a part of them and a part of what you're talking about, or is it it doesn't link? I don't understand either of them. I understand the individual donor thing because I've done that, but you think there's any rationale for being involved with that? Or one of those bases?
So when you say the other thing, do you mean like a database, like a CRM, or another service like Mighty
Service.
Cause? Or yeah, so there's just different platforms, and it's really up to you which one you want to use. So GoFundMe is a really common one. I don't know what their policy is with nonprofits. So all of the services do take some kind of fee. They cost something to use. Some are easier to set up than others because GoFundMe is mostly geared towards individuals. It's really easy to set up, right? It's super easy. You can do it really fast. There are some platforms, they only are used by, or primarily used by nonprofits. So you have to have like a 501c3, they have, so there's certain rules for different platforms. I would say if you're starting out, I would use a platform that your team is maybe a little familiar with and it's easy to use. So that could be GoFundMe. I feel like, I don't know if anyone else knows the answer to this, and I apologize that I don't. I don't know what GoFundMe's, how it works for teams. I mean, I know you can have one page as the main page and have several people fundraise as part of that team. I'm just not sure, because I know the more nonprofit oriented ones, the donation goes directly to the organization, whereas the GoFundMe, you might have to tweak some things to make sure that the money isn't being given to like a person, or, that's something I don't know. So I don't know if somebody has an answer to that, but it really is kind of a preference thing because there's so many options out there. And I would go with the one that you feel like your team would have the easiest time using, at least in the beginning, and you can always change later.
Well, their base is Facebook.
Okay, and Facebook now has a capacity to take donations, do fundraising. I haven't done crowdfunding or peer-to-peer on Facebook.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone else has. I don't think it's as robust. So even if they're
Barbara,
familiar with Facebook, yeah, go ahead.
Santa Barbara Wildlife Care Network did a GoFundMe at the beginning of this year for our spring baby season, the like big push of the year where we get a lot of the animals coming into our center. Right around when COVID started, it kind of was around the same time. So we decided to go with GoFundMe because the capacity is a lot bigger than using Facebook, which is what we usually use for quick crowdfunding. Working with wildlife, we have a lot of emergency quick campaigns that we come up with. We just did one for a raccoon surgery. And we've done those a lot through Facebook because that's where we have a pretty good audience. It can be fairly user friendly because people are already on Facebook. I think one issue that we run in with that is that Facebook has a algorithm, which means that instead of posting things in chronological order when they're posted from people that you follow, it posts more to what it deems as relevant to what you're looking at. So for those that are looking at our Facebook page a lot, they'll probably see on their Facebook feed that we started a GoFundMe or we started a crowdfunding. But for those people that are like interested in what we do, but they're not checking our stuff very often, it might get lost in their algorithm and they might not ever see it. So we used GoFundMe and it was integrated with PayPal, I think. So when the donations came in, they came in through GoFundMe. It took a percentage that I want to say was like lower than 10%. It's probably somewhere around like 2%. I'm not like 100% sure. But we use that and it's very user friendly, but it does take 2%. And I don't think that it mattered if we were a nonprofit or not. I'm pretty sure it's just for anybody. We could have been an individual and it would take 2%, or we could be a nonprofit and it would take 2%. So what Rona mentioned about it being other services might not charge as much for service fees, that might be something to consider, but it might not be as easy for people that are interested in your work and being a part of your crowdfunding. It might not be as easy for them to find as a GoFundMe or a Facebook. And I don't know so much about the peer-to-peer fundraising. We didn't try that. It was more just like share the link to everybody that you know, but we didn't have individual like GoFundMe pages from different people to all go to the same like bucket basically. But it might be possible. We never tried. We didn't really know that could have been an option, and it was more like a quick campaign, like let's just start it now. We didn't really plan it very far in advance, so it might be possible. Not sure.
Can I ask you a question about the 2%? Was that including the credit card processing fee, or was?
I
is
don't
the
think
card
so.
On top of that?
I was
I
just
think
about
it
to
might have been
say,
additional.
doing a kind of a matrix of, just to really make sure you're capturing all the costs. Because in my experience also, as you're anticipating, Jeannie, it's sometimes like really parsed out. So they'll say, we'll take 2% for admin fee, but then, unless you ask, sometimes they're not clear about like, oh yeah, and there's a 2% credit card fee, or, or whatever. So it's good to take all that into account, because obviously that affects your income.
Right. And what is the peer-to-peer that you're talking about? I'm sorry.
I know that we want to wrap up, and if some folks want to stay on, but I would want to respect folks that need to get off soon, and Stanley wants to do some wrap up. I will just say one quick thing. Your CRM, if you have one already, also might have capacity to do peer-to-peer fundraising. So you might not need another option if you have a robust CRM. So just another thing to keep in mind.
What is peer-to-peer? I'm not familiar.
It just means where you can have multiple people have their own fundraising pages, like the one I showed you earlier, and you can have a team of people who have their own fundraising pages, but they all funnel the donations to your organization.
Okay.
Yeah. So Stanley, do you want to do the wrap up, and then I'll stay on for a few minutes afterwards if anybody has extra questions or wants to stay on a little longer. Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll keep this open. Yeah. And thank you so much, Rona. Again, this is, I feel like I work in this space a lot, and I'm constantly learning from you. And yeah, just want to thank you for your time and thoughtfulness and the insight that you shared with us. And thanks to each of you for co-creating this space, for asking really thoughtful questions, for sharing about your experiences, and beyond that, really for your work in the community, which, knowing pretty much all of you is really, really exciting that you're in this space. So thank you. I will, just as a couple of items of follow-up, I'll send you a very brief survey, if you don't mind just filling it out with just your feedback. It's one way that we want to kind of refine our capacity building programs, but also know that I'm available. So I really want to stress my and the fund's availability to support you in your work. And so if that means a quick phone call to talk through strategy, if it's and if I don't have the answer, I'm happy to try and connect you with somebody who may. So please keep us in mind and how we can, my cat agrees, please keep us in mind and how we can be helpful in your work. I also just really briefly want to share that we've revamped our community calendar. So as you put on fundraisers or things of that sort, please feel free to contribute to that digital calendar, and then also let us know if you are doing some fundraising drives, and if it fits with our mission, we'll certainly promote it or queue it up in our social media as well, as long as it's nonpartisan. And then speaking of that, with the election around the corner, I've been working with our team to create a voter guide. So it has resources, including our endorsements around where you can vote. It even has a little toolkit on how you can create a ballot pod, as we're calling it, but basically how you can, just step-by-step guide on how you can just split up understanding the ballot and vote together and all that. So I'll drop those links in the chat here. And finally, Rona's offered to provide some additional resources like articles and things of that sort that we'll add to a Google Doc. And I'll make sure to also include some of the links that we brought up here in the chat and that came up. So just keep an eye out in your email. And again, just huge gratitude, shout out to Rona and to each of you as you go about and do your work, and appreciate you all spending time with us. So we'll close it out here, but again, we'll keep this channel open if you all want to connect. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Stanley.
Thank you. It was really good.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. That was great.
Thanks.
It's very helpful. Thanks a lot.
Great to hear. Thanks so much.